Hello and welcome to our webinar today, The Future of Labor in the Protein Value Chain. My name is Lance Misselbacher and I am the newest member of, I'm your host today and I'm the newest member of the Manitoba Protein Consortium and a longtime employee of Maple Leaf Foods. In 2019, the Manitoba government launched the Manitoba Protein Advantage. This initiative was designed to help the plant and animal protein industries attract investment, grow sustainably, and create jobs and opportunities for all Manitobans. We have a successful protein industry in Manitoba. Manitoba is home to the world's largest pea processing facility, the world's largest hemp processing facility. Manitoba has a world-class pork processing and hog production industry that's been vibrant for a long time. And recently, Manitoba is home to the largest human-grade canola processing plant in North America. However, as we all know, no industry can grow without people. People are the cornerstone of any successful business or industry. Today, we bring you an extremely knowledgeable panel to offer insights and strategies to attract and retain a skilled workforce. Let me start by introducing our panel. Lars Jensen, COO of Food Bio Cluster Denmark. Maybe Lars, you can tell us a little bit about yourself?
I can. I am indeed the COO of Food and Bio Cluster. I've for many years worked in the intersection between industry and academia, as you do as a cluster professional. So my insights into this stem very much from those types of collaborations that can arise out of those types of collaborations. I have a background in political science. I have a background in the ICT industry, and now I have 6 or 7 or 8 years now, I guess, in the food and bioresource industry. And I'm looking very much forward, and thank you very much indeed to you, Lance, and all the organizers for the invite. I'm looking forward to the discussion on the panel.
We have Denise Allen, Food Processors of Canada, the CEO.
Hi everyone, Denise Allen. I am the President and CEO of Food Processors of Canada. We're a national organization based in Ottawa, and for more than 35 years, we've been the leading voice of Canadian owners, investors, and operators of food-based businesses in Canada. Happy to be here, thank you.
Jacqueline Keena from Emily, Managing Director.
Good morning, I'm Jacqueline Keena, Managing Director at Emily, the Enterprise Machine Intelligence and Learning Initiative. We're an industry-led nonprofit here in Manitoba working to grow the digital agriculture ecosystem.
Thanks. Mikhail Dekkers, consultant with International Food Recruitment Alliance.
Exactly, yes, my name is Michiel Dekkers. I'm from the Netherlands. I'm actually working for DUB Food Recruitment, the Dutch part of the International Food Recruitment Alliance. And I have been a representative of IFRA from the Dutch side since 2014. We're a recruitment alliance with specializing in food jobs. We're doing a lot of work with food technologists within the protein sector, the classical one, the meat one, and also the new plant-based proteins. So I'm happy to share my point of view from labor in Europe and the changing aspects that you need to work in these new protein industries.
Thank you. We have Kevin Elder from Food Processing Skills Canada, Project Manager. Kevin, please.
Thank you, Lance. I'm Kevin Elder. I'm the Project Manager for Labor Market Information at Food Processing Skills Canada. We're a nonprofit industry support organization that does research, specifically for me, labor market research, as well as developing national occupation standards and certifications and a whole bunch of online learning and skills resources.
Thank you. We're going to move to questions right now. First, I'd like to let everyone know we will be accepting questions from the audience. Please use the chat box to forward them to our attention. Okay, Denise, what are the current labor gaps in the global protein industry, skills, and jobs that are hard to fill?
Thank you for the question. It's important to first outline the existing labor gaps in the protein industry before we can get to offering remedies or solutions. The pressures on labor, particularly on skilled labor, is acute and finds its basis in our ability to plan and invest in future general production workers. These jobs are usually packing or light processing roles and are challenged by downward pressure on wages and working conditions, which sometimes can be described as wet and damp, for example. It's also important to note that these challenges are more severe outside the larger manufacturing centers of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, which are representative of the competitive headwinds such as warehousing and logistics operations, which can more easily attract unskilled labor and higher wages with improved working environments, as well as more technical investment in automation. The second most challenging labor pool represents workers in packaging, machine setup, operators, processing machinery, and batch formulators. Further, meat cutters, butchers, harvesting skills, line Q&A or QC staff, and lead hands or team leads are also under pressure for labor. The next group or category of workers are truck drivers and logistics personnel, which often come with a need to manage ERP systems while utilizing skill sets which would see them operate forklifts and AZ trucks. The production leadership and management cycle, which starts with entry level and succeeds through management, has been disrupted and presents both efficiency-related skills as well as HR and food safety gaps and machine operation gaps. Finally, maintenance roles are under the same pressure, in particular electronic service skills specific to the machinery purchased. It's often reliant on supplier service and which can be remote or foreign.
Thank you. Kevin, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a few stats to add specific to Canada. We just finished a labor market study looking at the whole of Canadian food and beverage and discovered that the average employer in Canadian food and beverage processing has 6 vacant positions at the moment, and each of those vacant positions are, economists worked out, costs $190 net per day to carry. And so as an industry in Canada, we're losing $3 billion a year from unfilled positions at the moment. And looking specifically just at Manitoba, that its share of that is almost 1,500 vacancies in Manitoba, which is costing $101 million a year to the Manitoba food and beverage processing industry. And then as part of our study, we conducted a survey looking at challenges, and nationwide, the #1 challenge was access to labor. 61% of respondents said access to labor is their biggest challenge. Looking at protein, it's split across so many different NAICS codes. We found it was fairly similar in other food processing. It's 58% demand for labor. Meat processing was almost 70% demand for labor. And so there's quite a wide gap in terms of where the people are. And as part of a previous study specifically on meat processing in Southwest Manitoba, we found that the amount of people that the large pork facilities you mentioned need isn't met by the population that's currently in Southwest Manitoba, so they need to recruit from elsewhere. And that's a big feature of the Canadian labor market, is that there's not enough people to fill the vacancies in every sector of the economy. And so it's always stealing from another region or stealing from another sector to fill the gaps. And people have been managing right now, but the food and beverage processing workforce is older than the Canadian economy average workforce. And so there's more retirements coming, which will be a challenge to meet. And then on top of that, we also looked at the goals that were set for our sector by the economic strategy table and how we're going to meet them as a sector, and determined that by 2025, we'll need 56,000 more workers in food and beverage to meet the export targets set by that strategy table. And for is that we're looking at over 2,000 new workers needed in Manitoba, which is about 20% of the current workforce, to be able to meet that target in the next 5 years.
Thanks, Kevin. Jacqueline, do you want to add?
Sure, I can. So Emily's been doing some of this work here in Manitoba and with Protein Industries Canada across the prairies. And when we think about skills and talent gaps in the industry, one of the things that we've discovered is that broadly the skill gap areas, they fit into 4 broad areas, and we've heard these from Denise and Kevin. technical agriculture skills like agronomy and plant science, business skills like supply chain management and export market identification, technology expertise like machine learning or data analysis, and human skills like creative thinking or complex problem solving. And in a survey that we did of Protein Industries Canada members last year, what we found was that this business skill area really was particularly difficult to recruit. And that really goes to what Kevin is saying there, that it's difficult to recruit and actually locate in Manitoba. And the impact that we asked about from this skill gap most significantly was that people were unable to take advantage of the Canadian and international market opportunities, followed closely by being unable to meet current customer needs. So it really is quite a significant and urgent gap.
Thank you. Michiel?
Yeah, from a European perspective, it's good to give you an idea of what kind of positions we try to fill. So we're mainly active for bachelor and master degree educated people within management jobs. So you can think of quality management or operations management or maybe technical sales jobs. And when you look at the protein industry, it's kind of shifting from meat towards the more plant-based products. And it isn't that hard to find well-educated people for the meat alternatives, but it is hard to find people for the more classic, the meat protein industry, because we noticed that people make active decisions not to work in meat processing plants because they don't like the product, they don't like the atmosphere, so they have more of an image problem than there is a gap towards people knowledgeable enough to work in this industry. We get a lot of assignments to find operational people, so operators, team leaders, and these are simply impossible to find.
Michiel, could you please elaborate on what you mean by image?
Well, I think consumers in the Netherlands specifically, but I also asked all our partners, consumers are more susceptible to the fact that they need to eat less meat. I think this is maybe a bit different in the States and in Canada, but here it's moving very quickly. To give you an example, last year, the meat alternative snacks sales grew with 40%. That's very huge. So there's lots of opportunities within this plant-based industry, but the meat industry not so much. So it's not attracting. It's they don't want to work there anymore because it's not good for animal well-being, etc. There's scandals all over. People are moving away from that very quickly.
Thank you. Lars, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I want to elaborate a little bit on what Michiel is saying because I think it's interesting. We were talking, we did a survey last year on future competence needs on a European scale for the bio-based industries, and in relation to that also the protein industries. But I want to start out, before I give you some of the results from that, I want to start out by saying I completely agree with Michiel that some of the, I would say, three issues that are shaping demand for competences very much in the bio-based industries in Europe and very much in Denmark are the climate and resource constraints, which in turn impacts the protein market in a specific demand for the alternative protein sectors. So looking at alternatives to meat, alternatives to those types of value streams, and both new sources of proteins, but also decoupling the production of proteins from the natural resources, which has become a big area in our area and our country. So that calls also for two things, I think: interdisciplinary skills, the ability to cross over between different fields. I think you, Jacqueline, was also mentioning the ability to exploit and data, for instance, to act and react on data given from consumers. one of the other things it highlights is entrepreneurial skills, basically being able to highlight and find new opportunities in the market. So if we look at the survey we did with, I think, 2,000 respondents last year across Europe, what they are very much looking for is exactly that, the interdisciplinary skills and competences in both assessing technical opportunity, but also grasping economic potential and following consumer trends in that. So those are some of the things that we're looking into. On the softer side, and I think I might add on that because I don't have the specific numbers for Canada, what the study was and what it found was, if you're looking for the soft skills that are hard to find, the top rankings were personal initiative and entrepreneurship was the ones they were looking for. Problem solving ability and critical thinking and creativity. So those were the 3 top ranking skills that the bio-based industries and in that the protein industry were looking for across Europe last year.
Thanks, everyone. From your answers, we obviously have a people or a skill shortage. I'm going to go straight to this question here. The solution, we lies somewhere between, the industry themselves and government. And so the question I have is, what role can government play? And what type of programs are offered by governments in your regions or that you've experienced with that could help accomplish this goal? Denise, you want to start?
Sure. Our industry, in conjunction with government, must start to improve our ability to promote food processing as a viable and rewarding career. Career development plans are crucial, complete with clear paths to advancement and lifelong learning. The greatest demand in food careers will come from roles like automation technician, robotics technicians, electrical engineering technologists, electricians with PLC programming experience, as well as repair and setup millwrights and refrigeration or HVAC technicians. Further to the need for on-site training and development of specific skills, broad knowledge and an appreciation of food is required to create the culture required to better position food manufacturing as a lifelong, rewarding, and valuable career choice, and one which offers food safety, chemistry, product development, and innovation as a reward. HR leadership skills will therefore be necessary to foster such a working environment. Investment in HR leadership is therefore required and must come with competencies which address the societal shift in manufacturing.
Denise, in your answer, you're talking about training. Do you think that it's a combination of training and getting the people? Are the people here, or do we need to get more people?
You're absolutely right, Lance. It's a combination of curriculum that's currently offered and gaps in that curriculum and engagement from academia to create programs that are relevant and attractive. It's also ensuring that we have sound immigration policies that attract those unskilled workers to rural communities where the gaps are the most acutely felt. And finally, the perception of the industry, like Mikhail said, is a challenge. Right now, there's a mind shift to alternate protein sources, which is necessary and relevant. However, we need to have a broader discussion on animal protein production and the perception of targeted vilification of the animal protein industry to benefit alternate protein industries and government investment that follows. It's a huge problem from the position of agriculture and agricultural practices. It's a huge problem from a nutritional perspective. Animal protein is probably the most densely nutritious and bioavailable food in the world and can be done sustainably, which takes us into a whole discussion on marketing and the vast amount of greenwashing that's happening in the marketplace right now. So regenerative agriculture should be top of mind whenever we're creating curriculum targeted at the future benefit of our industry.
Thanks, Denise. Kevin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that Denise has touched on a lot of the key points for me as well. Certainly there's a role to play for immigration and job creation to make sure that people are able to come in. So for the meat side right now, they're doing the agri-food immigration pilot, which is allowing more meat cutters into the country, but it's only limited to meat. And so other food sectors don't have access to that same talent pool. And so it's important that government, when they're looking at just generally often they'll say, oh, we're going to open this new shiny facility, and it will be and talk about the jobs that facility will create. So like one example that came up all the time was the golf course that got built in Cape Breton, where they talked about all the jobs that were involved in that golf course, and all the lobster processors there said they didn't create any jobs, they just took my workers. And so it's about making sure that what government is doing actually drives the outcomes that they want. And so part of that's shifting the language away from job creation to vacancy reduction. And so for technology, when you're trying to bring in new technology to a facility, I've talked with lots of processors that say, this will save me 25 people on this line that I can shift to another area where I'm short people. And so it's not creating any jobs for them, it's just reducing their vacancies, which is just as valuable. But I've spoken with somebody that said the funding was contingent on them creating jobs, so they had to find a way to get new jobs, even though they were still short people. And it's this sort of confusing government funding language that doesn't drive the outcomes that people want. And then on the other side with technology as well, is making sure that there's a lot of funding that goes into development of new technologies, but then there's a big gap between commercializing that technology and making sure that it can get from the university laboratory to the factory floor. And that's a big gap in that government can step in to fill. And then just to add on to what Michael and Denise had said about
how can government step in to fill that? Like, what would be a solution that they could offer?
Well, I think some support for the research in that area. What we've found in some sectors where we've looked at is that there's a lot of government money available for developing a prototype. And then the idea is that when they have this prototype, the industry is just going to say, this is great, we're going to try to commercialize it ourselves for our one facility. But often, especially with some Canadian products, they're not global products, which isn't necessarily the case with protein. But and so that you're getting the situation where there isn't enough industry R&D money to spend the effort to commercialize that technology. And so just ensuring that government support doesn't end at a prototype is sort of an area where they could step in and say that we want to develop a technology that will be commercially viable, and to take it to provide funding for universities to continue their research to reduce the operating costs or the cost of building the machine or whatever it is, to get it to a level where industry can say, yep, now we can work with this. And then just to add on the perceptions, we've done some research as well and found that the general public, it's only about 1 in 3 that would consider a job in any food and beverage sector. And for meat, it was even lower than that. And but we also found that when people learn about what the jobs are, their chance of working in the industry goes up. Like, more education is helpful in recruitment. And so I think that when people are confronted with the truths of what actually happens, especially for new Canadians, often people are coming from other countries that don't have the same high food safety or labor standards that Canada has. And so they're reluctant to work in the industry because of their experience in their home country. And so I think getting the word out about what the Canadian industry is and what it looks like, and as well on environmental aspects as well. There's a lot of food and beverage processing companies that do a lot. And I've spoken with a meat plant that's actually selling energy back to the grid, and nobody knows about it. And it's like, you've got to shout that from the rooftops, because when people think about meat processing, they don't think about like carbon negative or energy negative, where they're selling energy back to their community. And so, and then just to highlight as well, there's a number of wonderful examples of a community working together with the processors in the area to sell the whole community, to get people to move there and work and set up roots in rural Canada. And that's a role immigration can play as well. If the government is dedicated to making sure that rural communities are vibrant, then we'll get people in there to work in the industries that those communities have.
So you're reiterating the image issue that Mikhail talked about earlier as being a problem.
Yeah. Yeah,
and government step in to help solving that solution. Jacqueline, do you have a thought? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's a government piece all on its own. I think, as Denise mentioned, industry needs to be involved as well. in doing something collaboratively to boost the image and making sure that that everyone is moving in the same direction. And so you don't want to get a situation where somebody's promoting something and it's actually at the detriment of something else. And so you want to move the whole sector forward together.
Thank you. Jacqueline?
The conversation has veered a little bit specifically to the skills and talent piece, which, you know, I think we're really passionate about and is a significant component in addressing skills gaps and bringing more talented people into the industry. And I would concur with what Kevin and Denise has said around and actually I think everyone on the panel has talked about this image issue and this idea that not only can we really promote the extremely positive and nutritious and valuable parts of the industry, but also talk about the meaningful and innovative and sort of technology-driven roles that are available. I think part of the issue here is that agriculture is an opaque industry. It requires a significant amount of subject matter expertise to really know what is happening. And so if we can increase people's awareness and understanding of this, it will draw people in, because I think there are lots of attributes about this industry and the work that is done as a part of it, which would be appealing to people if they knew more about it and if they knew how that actually got operationalized in the course of all sorts of these jobs. But one of the questions you asked was, what can government do? How can they play a role in attracting and retaining skilled labor? And so one of the things that hasn't been highlighted here that I want to touch on is this role of work integrated learning. And right now the federal government and a number of provincial governments as well are playing a really significant role in providing wage subsidies to bring on people, not necessarily just students, but also sort of an emphasis on young people into the industry through work integrated learning, whether that's co-ops or internships or other means of bringing young people in to term roles within companies. And so this idea of a wage subsidy, I think, is actually a really significant driver of attracting and retaining skilled labor in the industry, because it's providing a trial period for people to come into different jobs in different companies and see what they're actually like and see what happens on a day-to-day basis. It's valuable for the young person who's coming in so that they can get that job experience and so that they can see that their background, their educational or experiential background, no matter what discipline it comes from, can be applied in a significant and meaningful way in those jobs. And it's beneficial for the employer because they sort of get this trial period with a potential new hire and at a significantly reduced rate as a result of the wage subsidy. And so I think that those sorts of work integrated learning supports, whether they come from MyTax or BioTalent Canada or ICTC or Colleges and Institutes Canada, play a really significant role because they allow for that trial period, they allow for the exposure, and they really increase the awareness of people for how their background can be applied. And I think we need that because otherwise people get all the way to the end of their education or training and they miss how that can be applied in agriculture all across the value chain. So that's one area that I think government does actually play a significant role in addressing this labor gap issue.
Thanks. Lars?
Yeah, I wanted to also expand a little bit on the European experience on some government programs that could support this area. At least on a European scale, there's a significant area on student and researcher mobility, which is in place. What's called the Erasmus and the Marie Curie programs, which are supporting European mobility of workers and specifically students and researchers, which is a significant source of influx of skilled labor over the course of time. In Denmark, at least, we've also dabbled in tax incentives, which is, of course, very relevant for a high tax environment such as the Danish for international experts to settle and to be part of our industry. One of the programs or one of the ideas that we're working on a lot as well is entrepreneurial programs for international students. So this is a way also to sort of retain and to get people on board on this in their study period in universities or in vocational education, to involve them in entrepreneurial endeavors in different programs that deal with that, because that is one of the ways to keep them on board. Of course, also I could mention physical infrastructure. We're working very much on building environments that are attractive and open, and building international environments on key locations that are industry specific, where we can sort of capture this collaboration between academia, students, and industry in a physical workspace that allows people to collaborate, both on projects, on challenges, on student projects, on different of those types of endeavors. So, and I also wanted, of course, I wanted to turn my attention a little bit back to the last part about the image part, because I think yes, there is something unfair here in the way that the industry is being treated. But Danish Crown, a large slaughterhouse and meat manufacturer in Denmark, last year did some research into the fact where their carbon footprints comes from. So they've been looking at their processes and say 2/3 of the carbon footprint comes from the feed. So so at the same time, while we're looking at some of the unfairness and sort of the lack of knowledge, there's also some acknowledgement that the feed industry, that the protein industry is right now being perceived to some extent as part of the problem. And if we're looking at solutions, I think one of the acknowledgements would have to be that we also have to become part of the solution as well. So how do we embrace those possibilities to become part of solutions to climate, to environment, to some of the also issues on blue collar workers that have emerged over time. So I think that also embracing some of the problems will be the first stepping stone in moving forward towards a better image. But that's some perspective from my part at least.
Thank you. Michiel?
Yeah, there's so much to say. So many ways to look at this problem. What also came to mind is maybe offer fair prices for the products, because especially here in the Netherlands, it's the meat prices are under pressure. There's not a lot of margin on the products, so not a lot of money to spend on labor, which means that we have almost solely immigrants working in the slaughterhouses. It's not interesting at all for Dutch people to work there. There's simply a role for the government to give the farmers and the slaughterhouses fair prices, ask fair prices in the supermarkets, cut out the margins for the supermarkets, and make it a fair industry, because then there's room for innovation, then there's room for automation, then there's room for development. I think the industry has been lacking this for more than 20 years already. They're behind. They're even moving forward. They're not even moving forward anymore. I hope it's not too late, but we should start somewhere. Make a statement. Maybe eat less meat, but eat good meat instead of just the really cheap meat, and then we can start from there, because I think there is room for this. We're omnivores, we should keep eating meat, but not the way we have been doing so far.
So your thoughts is that the lack of profitability in the industry is preventing the companies from increasing wages?
It's just one of them. Like it's also part of the image problem, because there is no money to spend on good production sites and animal well-being, that the image is going backwards. So the knife cuts both ways, I guess. It's we need to do something.
Thank you, Michiel. From your answers, I'm hearing that there's image, there's skills. Where does the academic institutions lie in solving this problem? Kevin?
I think there's definitely a role to play for them. Go ahead.
How can they pivot or change what they're doing to improve the situation? And and attract people, attract students?
I think one of the main things that they can do is connect with the industries that are in their catchment areas to make sure that their programming is specific for the local needs of their market, and then to make sure that the industry as well is connecting with the academic institutions to let them know, like as Jacqueline mentioned, the wide range of jobs that are available, because often there's a lot of different programs that could feed people into the food and beverage industry that don't know that, like, ergonomists can go work in a meat plant to make sure people aren't getting workplace injuries and things like that, that the physiology departments aren't sending people there for their workplace integrated learning. And so there's connections that can be made there, and industry as well needs to be their own advocate to get out there and let them know what programs aren't meeting their needs. That was one of our survey questions, was, do you consider that current educational programming in your area is adequate? And for Manitoba and Saskatchewan, they got combined in our survey, only 45% of processors said that the education level was adequate, and almost that same amount said it was inadequate. And so there's definitely room to grow there. And one of the things that FPSC is doing is we've developed a learning and recognition framework that matches all the different skill levels in the industry. And we've been working with academic institutions to line up their programs and courses to our framework, so that when somebody takes a course at an academic institution, they'll get whatever certification from the institution, as well as industry recognized certification on that they've completed these modules or these courses, and so that they're more apt to work in the industry because they've already got some industry recognized credentials to go with their academic credentials. And so I think there's a lot of room for collaboration between the industry and academia.
Denise, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's some really interesting points there. We could approach the challenge or opportunity with academia a number of ways, from technical aspects to curriculum to partnering with food processing companies, all very logical and all very well established thought processes. If we were to start to use academia to help us correct the image of our industry, that would require a discussion on nutrition science and particularly nutrition guidelines, which are based in some sketchy scientific experimentation since the late 50s. So if we were to partner with academia and tell the story of how saturated fat and animal protein became vilified through some really spotty science and the history involving Ansel Keys and how our nutritional guidelines were developed from that oak seed into a giant oak tree of misinformation and disinformation about saturated fat, I think we could then start to approach the discussion of more sustainable animal protein and regenerative agricultural practices in a way that would engage the younger demographics. Currently, we're in an obesity and metabolic disease crisis that is largely responsible and perpetrated by the basis of vilifying saturated fat vis-a-vis meat. And that debate is still, the science is not settled. It's very much open to looking at historical scientific rigor around our nutritional guidelines, and opening a debate on how siloed we've allowed our food production and our food industry and supply chain to become. Politicizing food choices is really dangerous as well. As carnivores, we evolved eating meat. That's why, we're standing erect and we've got these nice big brains and enable us to look at scientific research in a much more critical way than we ever have in the past. And as our nutritional guidelines continue to be developed, promoting the shift from our natural evolutionary diet of protein and fat to largely carbohydrate based, we have no help and hope of arresting the nutritional devastation that we've set forth, and type 2 diabetes is now at a critical point with no signs of alleviation. So I think there's a bigger discussion to have there around image and scientific research and evidence and the historical evolution of how these nutritional guidelines came to inform consumer choice, and how the product development has come around to supporting that. also, as far as I think it was Lars that mentioned blue collar perception of our manufacturing environment, and that's a really important debate. It's a broader debate, and it's not just about food manufacturing. It's about the belief that somehow these are second-class jobs. It's about the belief that there's no creativity available in these jobs, and a career that's lifelong and involves innovation, product development, and feeding Canadians, which is really noble work. So there's all kinds of opportunity for us to debate and expand, as long as we start to break down some of the barriers and look at history and challenge some of what we think we know about food and nutrition.
Thank you. Lars, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I want to start off by saying one of the things that we could definitely do, or we definitely have some experience on, and answering to those demands that we also found in the study we did last year on interdisciplinary approaches. So trying to make combinations. I think one of the findings that I looked up before this webinar was interrelated, sort of traditionally disciplines that are far apart from each other are some of the things that are being requested now in order to meet those demands for let's say alternative approaches, new business models within this specific area. So if we can think in terms of informatics coupling up with biology, if we're looking for law degrees coupling with engineering, so to really address those types of interdisciplinary issues that are rising when you're looking at an industry that needs to transform. And I completely agree with Denise that it's a much more complex problem to look at the image part. And I think we're always circling back to that because it's so important in becoming part of in solving the problems that we encounter, both on let's say white collar and blue collar, because it's the same problem that we're facing no matter what demographic we're looking at, no matter what young people we're looking at. They're looking at the food and bioresource and the protein industry in the same way as something that is traditional and hard work in a lot of ways. In 2017, our local university, very close to where I'm living, Aarhus University, addressed this in a way where they developed a center that is looking at circular bioeconomy, trying to tap into some of the concerns that are really arising among young people, and also trying to address the interdisciplinary nature of what is happening when you need to solve those types of problems, looking into zero waste, looking into circularity, trying to really both capture the hearts and the wallets and speaking to both in terms of addressing both of those concerns that young people have, saying, is this a low income career? Is this a polluting, difficult industry to work in? How is this impacting? So trying to say, no, we're part of the solution. Looking at it from a technology perspective, looking at it from a business development perspective, looking at it from a chemistry perspective. So looking at that in an interdisciplinary way and tying all of those knots together in a center. So it's only very recent, and it's too early to really talk about the results. But I think those types of initiatives that try to bind together complex answers for complex problems is really what we need, and to address both of those at the same time. Yeah.
Thank you. Jacqueline?
So when we talk about academic institutions better aligning curriculum with these industry demanded needs, I think we're all in agreement here that the pace of innovation is moving really quickly. And it's something that all sectors of the economy need to collaborate on. Collaborations with private sector, government, and especially academia will help lead the way in the development and especially the integration of new innovations for the industry. And we talked about this a little bit in thinking about mobilization of these innovations into industry, getting it out of or getting it off the shelves of journal articles and actually integrated into industry. To academia's credit, in the last 2 years, in the midst of a global pandemic, I've seen a number of post-secondaries introduce new programming related to the evolution of agriculture, the further integration of digital technologies, and really considering how this interdisciplinary approach impacts the industry. So I think that they are on their way to doing this in a lot of areas. And I know that much of that work across the prairies has been done in collaboration with industry and other key stakeholders. I also want to touch on this term of co-opetition, which I know is sort of old news to this audience, but I think it's still really relevant in that while we may be competitors in some markets, we also need to be cooperative to build collective strategic advantage and to seize sort of new, bigger global market opportunities. So this idea of collaboration between industry and academia, I don't think will ever go away, because I think it's essential to success as we move forward. One tangible example that I'll share of this industry and academia collaboration is Manitoba's digital agriculture table. So it's just something that we're doing in the province of Manitoba for the moment, but it's this exact concept realized. Industry and academia, 40 people, about equal split between the two groups, working together. They meet about quarterly. Emily is a co-host of this table. And the idea here is that they meet, we work on a specific topic, we learn about it at each meeting quarterly. And really the idea is that as a group, we are trying to collaborate and seize new opportunities and address solutions, but also it provides the opportunity for those collisions to happen between industry and academia, where in the case that a particular company needs a micro-credential or specific training, it's easier to make these introductions and find the people that we're supposed to be collaborating with from a regional perspective.
Thanks. Now, Mikhail, I know you think the issue is a fair price, but what role can academia play in helping provide a solution here?
Well, I think it's already happening. We're located in Food Valley, which is a food cluster here in the Netherlands, university including, and you could see the big multinationals moving in, and they're starting to build research facilities here to incorporate all the young academia students to educate them young and make them familiar with the corporate structure. I think for the protein industry, there's also a role to play. So, well, there's available ground here. You should build your research and development centers here. Make them familiar with what's happening. So the integration is also happening already on a bigger scale. I also wanted to react to what Denise said about the diabetes and obesity problem right now. I think there's also a role for government to play there, because I think if we leave everything to consumers, then we'll keep making the wrong decisions, I guess. What, in my case, my girlfriend is fighting for over the last years is education for younger kids, and not on a bigger scale, because education about food is so broad and complicated and academic, and for most of the population, it's hard to reach, it's hard to understand. So you should make this easier and educate them on what food does with your body, and any type of protein does something and it has an origin. And if you educate kids on a younger age, it becomes more interesting to talk about it. What are you eating? How are you using it? Where does it come from? Maybe it's interesting for you to work in there, study food technology or food science. Get them interested, get them integrated into the chain on a younger age. So this is just a step before academia, because that's maybe the third step already in this chain.
Thank you. I got my first question from the audience. Is climate change and sustainability a threat or an opportunity to the protein industries? Lars?
Well, the easy answer is both, isn't it? As most cases are, but I think it's we've got to acknowledge that it's a concern. It's a concern for the consumer. It's a growing concern for the consumer, and because it's a growing concern for the consumer, the retailers are pushing the agenda through that meat consumption is bad, plant consumption is good, basically at the moment. That's the way, at least in our country and in most of Europe, that things are turning out at the moment. And I completely agree with you, Denise, that some of the nutritional aspects of that are not yet hashed out, and at least we're right now making choices that could potentially damage public health and raise public health concerns even further in the long run. Being that as it may, I think it also is a call to sort of say, okay, how do we, again, as I say, become part of the solution to this problem instead of being a part of what makes this problem worse? So we have to look at how do we source proteins, and there is a push now for looking at alternative sources for proteins, saying how are they grown, what are the conditions under which they're grown. Can we make some more robust life cycle analysis studies on how does this impact at the end of the day the carbon footprint and the environmental impact of this product when the consumer picks it up at the supermarket? What happens then? But it is both, as most global challenges and most big trends out there. It's both at the same time. For those who fail to pick up on this and to say that we can continue business as usual, they will continue to lose market shares. They will continue to lose employees. They will see their brand devaluate over time in comparison to others. And what I think also, and this comes from a country that's predominantly animal-based exports, so 75% of our food is exported, and most of that is dairy or meat. What we might be reluctant to admit, even in the Danish cluster, is it might not be the same companies that have spearheaded the meat and the animal industry that will be leading the way in the plant-based proteins, in the plant-based food products. That would be a very normal thing to say if you're a cluster professional, that the skill set that drives you towards excelling in the meat industry is not necessarily the same skill set that will drive you to excel in a plant-based environment or in an alternative protein environment. So I think we need to also look for the entrepreneurs. We need to look for the new skill sets. We need to embrace that within our initiatives, within our clusters, to say this might be where the next solutions are coming from, and that is something that's very difficult to do while you're at the same time serving some of the greatest collaborations or the greatest corporates in our environment. But it's important that we acknowledge that some of the skill sets required will come from new players in the market.
Jacqueline, do you have any thoughts?
One thing I'd add here for Canada, as we think about climate change, of course, I agree with Lars that it is both. We have a large production base. Canada is one of 5 jurisdictions globally that is a net exporter of food. So certainly we need to keep pace and perhaps try and outpace the revolution or evolution of climate change to ensure that we can continue to be a leader in this space and do so in a way that is resilient to climate change is really important. And so I think that this ability to innovate and augment production and processing practices to both increase our climate resilience and address our carbon footprint, it is an opportunity, and I think that's what we are endeavoring to set ourselves up for, to really make it an opportunity and to take advantage of the positive elements. But what goes hand in hand with that is that there is also risk, and so I think conversations like this and work on this and being intentional to not make sure that it sort of gets away on us is of critical importance.
Denise?
Yeah, those are some really good thoughts, and the best I can do right now is just build on them. One of our challenges, like Lars again mentioned earlier in conversation, is that the retailers are, they're in a very strong position to influence consumer choice. And unfortunately, a lot of consumer choice is based on what they see in store. And one way to challenge that is to open the discussion among very politicized views on food and food production is to start with soil science. So when we start with soil science, we then start to talk about biodiversity. We talk about how much petrochemicals are used in the production of plant proteins, and then start to question what regenerative agriculture really is, and is it possible to sequester more, even legacy carbon by pasturing ruminants, and how that cycle requires death and life. And the importance of soil science will eliminate a lot of the debate that we have on historically irrelevant scientific studies that says saturated fat's bad for us, when the most bioavailable protein, particularly B12, is absorbed through animal protein in the presence of fat. So, you know, macronutrients, that's the discussion. Soil science, that's where we start that discussion, especially with young people, if we're going to raise a generation that is going to start to understand how they can curb obesity and type 2 diabetes. And I think that that starting point will open the doors to question a lot of the other scientific studies that's influencing our perception on food.
Thank you. Kevin, your thoughts?
Just to add, I'll start. There's a Churchill quote that we've used before, and it just says, "A pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty." And on the climate change angle, going back to what Lars said before about a company that had looked into their own carbon footprint, something that we found in a generational analysis was that Generation Z and younger millennials especially, so the people that you're looking to bring into your workforce, care a lot about sustainability. And so if you're wanting to recruit those people, you need to care about sustainability as well. The government also cares about that. There's a lot of different programs around helping to meet the Millennium Sustainable Development Goals. And so if you look at your own company's situation and how you can, what you can do to document your journey, or to say, this is a situation and this is what we're working on as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and show your prospective employees and your consumers that you understand the challenge that's ahead of you and what role your company can play, and get the story out there from your own company or your own region to combat what consumers are taking in from other countries or other regions about what the situation is, to go, oh no, I'm happy I can go to the grocery store and get my protein from this company because I went on their website and checked them out, and they're not carbon neutral, but they plan to be. And that's a big thing that people can do their research and see they like the direction that people are going, and it's not just lip service. And I think on the company side, it's doing your own research to make sure you understand that a lot of this stuff is just good business. Like if you've got a large processing facility and all you've got is a metal roof, you could throw a whole bunch of solar panels on that, and yep, there's initial capital outlay, but it's going to start paying for itself. And then you can say, oh yeah, we're doing this and we're saving money here, and take advantage of the business aspects for yourself and how everything, like it's not one or the other. Like you can make the right choice for your business, the right choice for your employees, the right choice for your consumer, and move forward together. And you don't have to do everything at once. You don't need to flip a switch and say, yep, on June 15th, 2021, I now care about the environment and I'm going to do all these 18 things. You just need to make a plan that's like over the next however many years, and take a page out of government books. I mean, the government of Canada, I think their plan was 2030 or 2050 that they're going to do stuff by. So as a business, as long as you have a target that's in that same range, you'll be fine to show that you're carrying at least about the same level as government about meeting these goals.
Thanks, Kevin. I participated in a webinar about a month ago, and a major U.S. food company reiterated your comment that the sustainability initiative they started had the highest level of employee engagement of any initiative that they had ever done. So it leads to help us in terms of moving to help that image issue. The engagement of this resonates with people, and they like purpose. And so yeah, I think you've hit on an important point. I'll finish off this question with Michiel.
Yeah, I think what we're doing here is a big step towards the right angle, because we need to work together on this. It's a global issue, and it's maybe most relevant in the Netherlands. As you might know, half of our country is below sea level, so we might disappear in the near future if nothing changes. But I think these collaborations are very good, because consumers are moving towards sustainability as being part of a brand. It needs to be, because otherwise they won't buy the products. I have Good news for the plant-based industry, it's in a good spot, but even though it's in a good spot in the UK, it's even going further because soy is not sustainable enough anymore for consumers there. So they need to source other kind of proteins to build their products around. In France, they're only hiring people for these new businesses if you're actually having a lifestyle that fits their company profile. So you need to be living the life, need to be eating vegetarian or even vegan. So it's getting there, and I think awareness creating with each other that we're doing right now is a really good step.
Thank you. I've got another question from the audience. How has the publicity around outbreaks at processing plants affected staffing? Kevin?
Certainly, it had a negative impact on that. There's people. It's a difficult situation to be in, and different provinces have different rules, and I'm not up to date on what Manitoba's rules specifically are around this. But I know that when they occurred, there's a fear, especially throughout the industry, that if it happened in one place, there was not a lot of publicity about the on-the-fly changes that the processing sector had to make, especially meat processing, to try to continue operating as an essential service when everything else was locked down. And so if you're working in one processing facility, it sort of almost had to be hyper local to look at what's going on in your facility. Do you feel safe going there? And I think what would definitely help in future as well is to understand the nature of what caused the outbreaks. There's been a few of them throughout the country, and so some of them people were concerned they were caused on the production floor. Other people said, well, they had to take public transit from where they lived to where they were working, and so there are much fewer protections on public transit than in the facility, and so the facility might have been the safest place that they were working, or other people in their living situation, if they're living with other frontline workers in other sectors, that there's just higher risk. And so we don't know exactly where it came from, but certainly anytime, I think for any of us, if we heard that we're working in an office building and there was an outbreak even on the floor below us or the company next door, people are going to think twice about going into their office. It's just a natural consequence, but it's certainly one of the things I think the sector did really well is looking back over the whole of 2020 is that we ended 2020 with 98% of the food and beverage processing labor force that we had in 2019. And so I think the Canadian economy as a whole was about 90%. And so I think as a sector, we've done quite well in retaining the workers that we had and filling the gaps. But certainly when there's news like that, it's a lot easier. It takes a lot of work to build up the image and combat the negative perceptions. And when you hear things about a COVID outbreak or something like that, it's easy to knock down, right? It's a precarious climb up, and it's easy to slip back.
Thank you. Jacqueline, any thoughts?
I'm not close enough to it to really provide specific comments, but one thing I'd add is that these outbreaks really underscored, I think, the fragile or the fragility of our supply chain, specifically related to meat processing in this example. And so, I think it's an opportunity to highlight the need there, perhaps to make additional investments that, whether or not we're talking about a global pandemic or just flu season or things like that, being able to be better prepared as a result. And I think also it's an opportunity, as people are more aware and focused on it, to highlight the kinds of jobs, the kinds of opportunities in this area.
Thanks. Denise?
Those are good points, and I'd like to build on them. When the pandemic started, Food Processors of Canada, or FPC, decided with purpose and intent to take a total supply chain view, understanding the risks and disproportionate effects that some manufacturing plants in certain sectors have felt over others. And in doing so, we were able to highlight to government that a lot of the meat processing facilities and slaughterhouses the workforce is multi-generational in nature. And therefore, we brought forth recommendations to government that said, look, we need to deploy rapid testing much sooner. And we need a two-tiered approach to vaccination. So ensuring that essential workers in particular, including food processing laborers, do need to be vaccinated because it is a multi-generational environment. So when mom or dad go to work, they often are working alongside a relative that live in the same household, and being able to contain outbreaks sooner was dependent on our recommendations. So we're starting to see some movement there, and that's good news. However, the positive in what we've learned in the last year and a half is that these facilities are not separate and distinct from the rest of the food production cycle. We need to have a better understanding of full cycle understanding of where our food comes from in Canada. And in doing so, we can better prepare the next generation to not be so disconnected from their food source and make better consumer choices.
Thank you. Lars?
Of course, I'm not able to comment on the specific outbreaks in Canada, but I can say that we in Denmark had similar experiences where staff and employees in slaughterhouses were having site-specific outbreaks. What I think that did, and I think the question was, does that damage the industry in terms of attracting labor? And I think it did, but not in the sense that it's the outbreak in itself, but in the sense that it highlighted some of the negative thoughts on what it is like to be a worker in the industry. It highlighted that the main people affected by the outbreak were immigrant workers in fairly poor and congested living situations where there was disease was easily spread between individuals and so on. So it didn't directly relate to the workflow or to the industry as such, but it highlighted some of the negative stories and reinforced some of the negative stories that I think are out there about what it is to work in food processing industry, at least in Denmark. So I think from that perspective, it definitely hurt us a little bit on that score.
Michiel?
It's exactly the same case in the Netherlands. It's not directly related to the work floor. It's more the living environment where all the immigrant workers are stationed and living. So it's exactly the same. It was bad for the image.
Do you think that after going through the pandemic, that the government provided the right solutions? What are key learnings for us? Kevin?
I think that there's a lot that's been mentioned. Both Denise and Jacqueline talked about the whole supply chain, and I think that that's something, an area where government could get involved in. Denise mentioned earlier as well the siloing of the food industry, and I think that that's something that we've seen as well with like sort of hyper specialization that was exposed during the pandemic. I mean, one example from the dairy sector was the facilities that produce like 20-liter containers for restaurants or hotels or something like that were unable to just flip a switch and produce grocery store size quantities of product. And so it necessitated a massive shift from that, even on a more fun sector like brewing. A lot of brew pubs they weren't able to open, so then they had to start bottling lines and different things like that. And the amount of shifting that was required. So I think from a government angle, if there was some funding that helped provide flexible production technology so that if there was another major shock from outside, that there would be saying, okay, we can switch from industrial to commercial quantities or back and forth to make sure that there's more stability throughout the chain so that meat processing isn't shut down. But I also don't think any of the safety precautions that were brought in to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, like the shields between workers and some of the lines, I don't think any of those are getting taken out when this is over either. And so that it will be a more safe environment going forward.
Thanks. Denise?
I think those are all good thoughts. I think there's a lot of opportunity to break down the silos and particularly the politicization of our food system. It's really dangerous. And at the top of that pyramid is human nutrition and human health. And when we become better informed on the requirements to reverse the trend of metabolic disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, that forces us to have a different discussion about macronutrients as well as soil science. We're really concerned about the amount of tillage and the amount of topsoil that's available for farming in the next 30 years. And how that soil and those agricultural practices are going to be put in place or changed or improved to better support consumer choice that should be based in sound and rigorous science. So if we could switch the conversation more often to soil science and regenerative agriculture, I think we'll find our way around a lot of those marketing campaigns that are both creative and not based in sound and rigorous science.
Jacqueline, would you have anything to add? We're going to be running short of time here very quickly, so I really appreciate the panel. You guys have done a great job, and if everybody could take 30 seconds if they like, I can start with Lars just to wrap up.
Well, then I'll wrap up on the question of the pandemic, and as you asked it, because I prepared that in my head. And what I was thinking was, how has the government handled that? One thing I would like to say on a Danish perspective, when we're talking about labor force and skills, using the active labor market policy to say that people who are out of a job or are in a problematic area of industry can take time off and then do a course and come back stronger and better is something that I think we've had great success with in Denmark. This is not the first time that has been done. That has been done in other crises as well, but it was also done for this pandemic. And I think that is one of the ways where a government can hit two birds with one stone and try to both alleviate the economic downturns of the pandemic, but also allow people to gain new skill sets in the process of that. So I think that has been one great success. And thank you very much, Lance, for your facilitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline?
So the title of this panel today was Future of Labor in Protein, and I think we've talked a lot about the opportunities in front of us in the protein industry, both plant and animal. Here in Canada, I think we have a big opportunity to grow the labor force in protein from all sorts of disciplines and in all sorts of different jobs. I think that for people who already work in the industry and for people who work in adjacent industries, we have a job here to do to tell the story about the opportunity, the meaningfulness of this work and how it contributes. I like how Denise has framed this for human health and nutrition, because all of this does sort of lead up to that as sort of the underlying principle about why what we do is so important to the global population. And at the very beginning of this talk, I talked about the 4 sort of areas of skill gaps that we've identified, one of them being human skills. And I think that, you know, in the last number of years, we've talked about soft skills. And I really do think that this need to change it to human skills is important, not just because it's a different language, but because the things that humans can bring to this work in terms of problem solving and creative thinking is something that's uniquely human. And so automation will continue to disrupt the industry, but it won't eliminate the total number of jobs. It will move people to things that we're uniquely advantaged to participate in. And I think that that's also really important to underscore to people both in the industry and people looking to join it.
Thank you. Kevin, quickly.
Yeah, I just really liked what Jacqueline said about human skills. And I think just adding to that is that human skills are also the ones that you need to build successful communities. And so often when we're looking for solutions, we're looking just at what does this facility need or this industry need. But for the whole sector to succeed, it has to have a strong community, especially rural communities where a lot of the protein sector is located. And so if you have people with human skills, they'll succeed at work, and they'll succeed in building a healthy community as well. And I think that's where we all win.
Thank you. Michiel?
Well, to end with a very positive note, I think this pandemic learned us something, that the food industry is very stable. We're all still here. We're all still manufacturing. We're all still eating. It proved that we're very entrepreneurial. A lot of companies switched their their products towards different markets, different countries, different ways of selling their products. Even though it's becoming a luxury problem because they tend to get new customers and now they don't have ways to produce it anymore. So I think we're coming out stronger. There's even more need for skilled workers. There is even more need for R&D, for innovation. So let's do it together. Let's get everybody interested, and just everybody needs to work in protein and food industry.
Thank you. And Denise, I'll let you close.
Oh my, thank you for that. You know, I'm going to go back to something we touched on earlier in the conversation. That's perception. It's the perception that somehow these are second-class jobs, that somehow blue collar, making a choice to go into blue collar, unskilled or skilled trades is somehow less than. And academic following is just false. And we need to do more to correct that and bring back the joyfulness in our industry. We produce food, we make food. It's something we all share. We all enjoy in our own ways. And when we start to talk about food as a joyful, creative pursuit, I think then the policy that supports our industry will start to change.
Thank you. Again, I would like to thank all the panelists. You've been great. I've learned a lot today. As well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you were able to gather some valuable insights from the explanations to the answers to the questions that our panel provided. Thank you. Take care. Good day.